Test. Okay. And we're live. So, welcome to Generational Power. I'm Jane Doe, and I'm recently doing videos on articles that I've been writing. If you've been following me on my website, genpower.substack.com, this won't be new news to you, but since a lot of content is created and spread over YouTube, I'm starting one of those. So I recently did an article saying, why are we rushing for a COVID vaccine? I think I wanted to do this mostly because I wanted to understand why people felt the way they did about the vaccines. I think CNN did a poll about like 2/3 of people wouldn't take the COVID vaccine if it was given out. So you see a lot of things on the news about like vaccine hesitancy. And you know, people aren't crazy. There's a reason they believe the way they do or feel the way they feel about certain things, but there's also history behind it. So as we currently have seen, if you didn't already know, that the CDC sent out a letter to all the governors telling them to officially get their labs ready to be giving out a COVID vaccine 2 days before election by November 2nd, which is crazy. So then I was like, okay, so why are we rushing all of this? As AstraZeneca just got paused for their global clinical trials for phase 3, that they were at the end of it. A woman has severe adverse effect reaction to one of the vaccines that she was given, and so they're stopped, and they were one of the front runners. They were combined with the University of Oxford, and they were using a viral vector. Just a little more about my background for people watching on YouTube. I was pre-med. I had a bio degree, graduated in 3 years, and a minor in biomedical engineering in undergraduate, and worked in various labs. And then I went to Hopkins, and I got my master's in biotech and worked in a stem cell lab there. So I'm really into research, or was. And so I've been using this background to kind of just dig up things and report them out. So on top of that, the vaccine that the FDA is going to clear, they announced that the vaccine candidate will only have to be at least 50% effective. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know if I would want a vaccine that's only 50% effective. Again, I'm not saying I'm an anti-vaxxer. I used to work also in pediatrics in a hospital, so I've had all my immunizations, I've had all the vaccines. In order to work in healthcare, you have to get all of them. But, they're kind of just given out, and I don't know if I still worked in healthcare, if I would take this. And I was talking to some of my nursing friends about it. And so it seems like people are back and forth about it. So vaccines, have been around for decades. We've eradicated smallpox, and recently they announced that we have gotten rid of the mutant polio vaccine, mutant polio stereotype. But what they failed to let you know is that the vaccine that has been given out for polio is the vaccine that they gave out for polio has mutated and gotten into people's feces into the world, and then people who are exposed to this mutant form of it get a deadlier, more contagious version of polio, because there's 3 types. Okay, so I'm just going to go into the history of problems that have occurred in history over vaccines, and this is just going to be today's episode, and I'm going to not go on from there. So in 1955, there was the Cutter incident for polio vaccine. It was the first batch. The first batch of polio vaccines were made in 1955. They were given to the public. They contained the live version of polio. And even though it passed at that time the standards for safety testing, over 250 cases of polio were attributed to vaccines produced by the company of Cutter Laboratories. So then from 1955 to 1963, 10 to 30% of the polio vaccines administered in the US were contaminated with Simon virus 40, SV40. And all this you can look up. It's even on the CDC's website. So I'm not saying anything that's new. Then the US eradicated polio in 1979. The version we were able to eradicate it because we switched from OPV using the live virus. We switched the type of vaccines that we were getting for polio. But in poorer countries, it's not as cheap to give them this nice vaccine. So for years, we were giving people in Africa the OPV vaccine, which has now created and is stated by the United Nations has created a new polio mutation derived from the vaccine. And they admit it, and it's now in over 30 countries. Okay, so that's the history of the polio vaccine right there. And the reason that they did the OPV is because it's cheaper, easier to administer, and it's thought more effective to be controlling the different outbreaks because it contained all three of them. But now the type of vaccine that they give now mutates into the second one, which is what we're seeing now in the world. So I've seen it, I've read into it. They're now like calling for, vaccine producers to create a new novel polio vaccine. But, after all this, I'm like, if we keep messing with things, it might not turn out the way we think it is. Like you can try to solve for every problem, but you can't predict everything that's going to happen in the future. Okay. So then there's the H1N1 vaccine. In 2009, 2010, Demerix was never licensed for use in the US. So we were never given this vaccine in the United States, but it was made explicitly for the H1N1 pandemic. So patients had adverse effects when mixed between 2009 H1N1 influenza vaccines and when the person had the 2010-2011 seasonal flu vaccine. So if you were given the seasonal flu vaccine and then you were given this, made for the pandemic vaccine, you then developed narcolepsy, which is a sleep disorder. 60 cases of this emerged among 4 to 19-year-olds in Finland. Okay, so then most of those who had received the vaccine was from Pandemrix, which is also from GlaxoSmithKline, which is a huge manufacturer of drugs. And then more of these clusters showed up in Sweden as well. Yet, if you look deeper, a lot of scientists won't say that they determined that the H1N1 vaccine that they made contributed to the narcolepsy cases. They could say it's for a whole bunch of other reasons. And all I know is that after reading all this, they can say it's determined by something else easily. Okay, so then in 1976, there was a small increase in a neurological disorder called GBS, Guillain-Barré syndrome, following vaccination of the swine flu vaccine. So when you think about, especially after this AstraZeneca, coronavirus vaccine has been stopped, they're like, the head of the FDA, Dr. Francis Collins, was like, these happen. This is why we have clinical trials, which he's right. But he's saying, that, and people know that you can get adverse effects if you're immunocompromised from vaccines. So they say it's 1 out of X amount, right? You're going to get it. But say you're giving this vaccine to millions of people, then 1 out of 1,000 seems like a lot of people. So in this case, especially with the swine flu vaccine that I was just previously talking about, they said the increased risk was approximately 1 extra case of GBS for every 100,000 people who got the swine flu vaccine. Okay, so then the Institute of Medicine said that people who received the 1976 swine influenza vaccine had an increased risk of developing GBS. So say you had this version of the swine flu vaccine and then you were given the H1N1 pandemic vaccine, you don't know that your previous vaccination could make you more at risk for a current vaccination that's being released. You just don't know those interactions. The common person doesn't have a list of where and what type of average vaccine they got X amount of times ago. I was like pins and needles when I was a baby. I don't have that list. So, you don't, that risk, I think it's like, letting people know that there is a risk and that their risks are justified and there's a reason people feel, hesitant, and not just dismissing it as, you don't care about the mass population, you're crazy. Like, I think that just dismissing this kind of history is really bad, and which causes distrust of vaccines. If people don't know this and they find it out later, they feel like they're lied to when, heads of big pharma or drug companies are just telling them to take something for the common good. So then there's the MMR vaccine triplet, which I know I'm not going to say it causes autism or not. I'm not going to go there. But the MMRV triplet, you can't disregard millions of people and patients who have the same similar story. I think that is weird too. And then 2007, Nicola Klein, she is a co-director of Kaiser Permanente Vaccine Study Center in Oakland, California. Her and her colleagues did a study, and they found that children aged between 12 and 23 months old who were immunized with a combination vaccine for measles, mumps, rubella, and varicella MMRV had more febrile convulsions 7 to 10 days after the vaccination than those receiving separate MMRV vaccines. So as parents, they hear this, and like more studies come out and more doctors say, it's not that, but they made it illegal. The federal government banned the use of single-use MMRV vaccines. So why would the government do that if they knew that, certain people were coming up with something, when you could just bring your kid in for like 4 or 5 different visits, space it out, give it to them at the appropriate time. But no, you're going to shoot them up with 4 different vaccines at the same time. And then she found that there was like one out of 2,300 doses ended up having these convulsions because of the combined MMRV vaccine. So maybe they don't have autism, but they start having the twitches. The babies start like looking like that. That's weird. So the U.S. government, after banning the use of single use for doctors to do, were forcing parents basically for a while for doctors to administer all of them at once, deciding for them. Like, it wasn't an option. You couldn't go to your doctor and say, let's space them out. Like, I don't want them all at the same time. Like, it was law that you had to have all 4 at the same time. That's crazy. And in Japan, they banned the triple shot because they saw problems with their children, and they're facing like a lot of issues with their population. Okay, so the next one is respiratory syncytial virus, RSV. In 1998, the FDA approved of Rota Shield vaccine, but that initial vaccine, the first round, was pulled from market, and then emergency investigations were performed. You know why? Something bad happened. Results of the investigation show that Rota Shield vaccine caused insaturation in some healthy infants younger than 12 months of age who usually would have been at low risk for this disease. So that is basically where the live virus vaccine caused swelling of their stomach, their lymph nodes, and increased contractions and enfoldings in babies. And afterwards, the pervasive respiratory virus was proven resistant to the vaccination after, a bunch of kids got this stomach problem. So then children who were treated with the one vaccine in 1960s had an enhanced form of the disease because of the vaccine, because the virus was immune to the vaccine, and suffered from high fever, pneumonia, wheezing, and many were hospitalized and 2 died. And then afterwards, since 1998 for RSV, researchers have not been able to make a vaccine that's for public use, according to the CDC, okay? So babies with a high risk of RSV are sometimes injected with an antibody to help fight it off, but other than that, there's no vaccine for it. And people are fine. Okay, hepatitis. So this is more internationally, but 10% of Egypt's population has hepatitis C. 10%. Why? Because they were given most of the Egyptian population was given an injection to protect them from bilharzia, a parasite, and that that injection led to outbreaks of hepatitis C, but the government buried that evidence. So in 1998, there was some research concerned with, the vaccination might be linked to this, and people found out and they were mad, and they I think they had protests against the government about this for transparency, which is like, if your government is trying to shoot you up with something, they should tell you why. Merck had a few recalls done. In 2007, Merck and Company voluntarily recalled 1.2 million doses of Haemophilus influenza type B, HIB vaccines due to concerns about potential contamination with a different bacteria. And then in 2013, Merck and Company recalled one batch of Gardasil, a human HPV vaccine. The recall was a precaution following an error in the manufacturing process. Sorry, my dog's saying hi. Atlas. Okay. Dengue fever. In 2017, the Philippines stopped a school-based vaccination program after reports of complications and several deaths linked to the product Dengvaxia. The French manufacturer Sanofi Pasteur later said the vaccine posed a risk to people who did not have a prior infection from one of the disease's 4 serotypes, and the vaccine increased the risk that the child would contract a more severe form of the disease. The US FDA approved the vaccine last year for limited use for children of certain ages living in endemic areas and previously infected with a form of the virus. So there's a lot of qualifications. But as you're seeing from this video now, there is history, okay? History I just mapped out for you on a CDC's website. You can Google it. I'm not, trying to lie to you. I'm not trying to mislead you. I'm not trying to create concern. I'm just saying the first round of vaccines that is ever given to a population sometimes doesn't go right. And I think in my next video, I'll go over some of the scientific things about the COVID vaccine that makes me a little worried. And, I'm not saying I want to get it, but I'm saying that if 2 to 3 months from now, when a lot of people, whether or not the government approves of a rushed approved COVID vaccine, and I start seeing people come out with these adverse effects, I'm unfortunately not going to be a guinea pig. I'm opting out of that. I will stay home. I'll self-isolate. I'll do videos every day. I don't know, but I'm not gonna be a guinea pig. And if someone forces you if your kid needs to go to school and they want to make sure that you have the vaccine, what if they just give it to your kid without you knowing? That happened before. The Raggedy Ann dolls, I learned this the other day, and it made me so sad because I had a Raggedy Ann doll, was made by a guy who his daughter was given a vaccine at school without his permission, and she died a few months later. She basically became like a doll. She couldn't move anymore. And so he made the Raggedy Ann dolls to promote safety and concerns about vaccinations. So that was kind of weird, but I wouldn't want my kid to, in order to go to school, be given a vaccine that may or may not affect, the way they grow in life. So, okay, that's the history right now of, flaws with vaccines, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.